Winter of 2016, I was a freshman in college and beginning to enjoy life away from home for the first time in my life. I don't know if it's something to be embarrassed, because I am, for the fact that I had only one girlfriend back in high school. Naturally, I'm a little awkward around girls I like, and so it was a challenge getting a new girlfriend in college. Now that you know how lame I am around girls, I think it's the perfect time to introduce you to Chelsea, my dream girl. We had Psych 101 together among other classes, but in Psych, she would always sit right next to me. It was by far the most awesome class ever. It took me 2 weeks to speak to her, another 2 weeks to become friendly, and 3 more weeks after that to finally muster up enough courage to ask her out. She said yes. For our first date, my plan was to take her for lunch, go bowling to burn off some calories from the meal, and then take her to a movie theater to watch a film. Lunch and bowling was great. We were really hitting it off. Then on to the movie theater, and that's when things started going downhill very fast. The theater was packed and we barely found 2 seats where we could sit together. Unfortunately, the guy sitting in front of us was one of those idiots who can't stop talking. To add insult to injury, he was texting every 2 minutes, essentially blinding us every time he turned his phone on. After half an hour, I asked him nicely to stop talking and texting, but he responded by telling me to suck a rooster. After a few more rounds of him shouting out loud, "Yeah boy, that's what I'm talking about, F that MFer," I had it with him. I tapped on his shoulder, he looked back, I got up, he got up, and I said loudly so everyone could hear, "Shut your fucking mouth or I'll make you go to sleep, you piece of shit." It was during a quiet scene, so 1 second of silence, 2 seconds of silence, and then the whole theater erupted in applause. I guess the guy had some shame in him because he looked embarrassed and walked out of the theater. Chelsea smiled and she seemed to be proud of me. To be honest, I was a nervous wreck and I merely did my best to hide it. We enjoyed the rest of the film and walked out into the hallway when it was over. I didn't have to use the restroom, but I first brought up that I wanted to hit the toilet because I felt that she may want to go and it was probably more comfortable for her that I say it first. I did, she said she wanted to go too, and off we went our separate ways to the restroom. I stood in the urinal to take a piss. I unzipped, set it free, and the magic fountain began spraying, when I could feel something really hot around the waist area. Then an immense pain followed right after. I turned my head and could see the same guy who I mouthed off, looking shocked and scared. His right hand was dripping blood. I held on to the urinal for balance and I saw the guy run out of the restroom. 2 men out of the whole bunch of others who were in the restroom came to help me. One of them shouted to his friend to call 911, and the other gentleman took off his jacket and seemed to be putting it around the knife that was still lodged in my waist, then applied pressure. I was taken to the hospital after that. The doctors did their thing, and I obviously survived the injury. Today, a year after the incident, my attacker still hasn't been found. Apparently, the security cameras did capture the guy, but the quality was shit and he was wearing a hat. The police have a theory as to why he was able to disappear so easily, but it's not something that I can disclose here because it could upset some people. There is good news, however. Chelsea and I are dating. We've been together for a year and we couldn't be happier. At least I hope she is too. So yeah, I was almost stabbed to death while trying to shut a guy up. If there's a lesson to be learned from this story, I think it will be that it's always smarter to avoid any and all confrontations with unsavory individuals. Trust me, it's better than getting stabbed. It was one of those days when nothing seems to go your way. I was in my studio until 9 at night correcting a problem when my boyfriend texted me and suggested we should watch a movie. The bigger part of the problem was already remedied, and I figured I deserved to have some fun. I left the studio and met up with my boyfriend at a coffee shop before heading to the movies. We arrived for the last screening, only 2 minutes left on schedule, and sat in the best seats of the house. At least they're best for us. We like to sit in the middle and around 1/3 of the way from the lowest row of seats. The theater was pretty much empty, except for a few people in the back of the theater, and a father and son duo seated 3 rows in front of us. To be frank, it was kind of a what the fuck sight, because the kid looked barely 8 or 9 years old. So it was way past his bedtime, so to speak. The film began, and about a half an hour into it, I noticed the kid was squirming in his seat, and the father had a tight hold of him to prevent him from moving around so much. I kept seeing them struggle every time the screen lit brighter during daytime scenes, and it was unsettling to see a child like that. At one point, I told my boyfriend about it, but he was enjoying the movie far too much to give a damn. But then I saw something really disturbing. The father, quote-unquote, placed the hand of the boy in his crotch and pressed against it with one of his hands, then proceeded to slide his other hand into his son's pants. I knew right there and then this guy was no father, and the kid was no son of him. I told my boyfriend about what I just saw, and this time he got up like he had a spring compressed under his butt, then rushed toward the man. The pervert tried to escape, and my boyfriend struggled with him for a good minute. I tried to help, but I'm 5'1" and 102 pounds. I basically rolled around like a bowling pin every time the man would push me with one hand. I screamed for help, but none of the cowards at the back of the theater came to give us a hand. The pervert was much bigger than my boyfriend, and eventually he lost grip on the perv. The creep ran out. My boyfriend chased after him, but he lost him after a few blocks of pursuit. I took the boy out of the theater, informed the theater attendants of the situation, and the cops arrived not long after. When the dust had settled, the entire situation came to light. The boy had ran off from home and wandered around the city the whole day on his own. He somehow sneaked his way into the theater later at night and was about to watch a movie on his own when the pervert sat next to him and began molesting him. He wanted to run, but the creep had a knife on him and told him he'd kill him if he refused his advances. The pervert was probably thinking of a way to sneak the kid out of the theater, and in the meantime, he couldn't help himself from groping the kid. Lucky for him, I was able to see the whole thing, and even luckier, I was with my boyfriend. I don't know if they ever caught the perverts because I didn't follow up on the case, but I do know the kid was returned home safely. I'm well aware that perverts like that are statistically rare in most Western societies, but still, it's a dangerous world out there. Keep your children safe and close. I'm one of your loyal viewers from South Africa, and I've got a story that you might find interesting. I think this was 6 or 7 years ago because I was still in college at the time. It was Sunday, and my friend and I didn't really have anything to do on that day. With nothing better to do, we decided to go watch a film, and so we went to the cinema. I've been to the US, and the cinema we were in doesn't even begin to compare to most of your cinemas. The screen we were in had at most 12 rows of seats, and the audio has a lot left to be desired as well. I'm sorry, this isn't about cinema reviews. But yeah, the film rolls and all of us are glued to the screen. The smaller screens are kind of cool when you're watching horror films because of the close proximity to the action. During the scenes of slash and gore, things get really visceral. I guess I forgot about that one advantage of smaller screens. We were watching a real fucked up scene. I mean, this would test even the most hardcore horror film enthusiasts, but then there's a brief pause and flicker of the film, and the scene changes from a man getting tortured to a woman tied up in a chair. Was this part of the film or did they make a mistake? I had no idea. The film continues and we see a masked man approach the woman with a hacksaw in his hand. He proceeds to straighten one of her fingers, places the hacksaw on top of it, then begins to sew it. By horror film standard, it wasn't all that gruesome, but it was the scream of the woman that made everyone in the screen express their disgust loudly. I felt uncomfortable too because her pain seemed so real. Then there's another pause and flicker of the screen, and we can tell some time had passed after the sewing of the finger. The finger stump was bandaged up and the woman looked to have been beaten up quite badly. We also see her legs have been secured firmly with the use of thick ropes, and she's barely moving if at all. This time the man takes a screwdriver and places it on top of her knee joints. He strikes the top of the screwdriver with a hammer and the woman screams in agony. His strikes are hard but meticulous. He moves the screwdriver a little by little from one side to the other, thus creating a cavity in a crescent shape. When it's done, he places a crowbar in between the cavity and gives it a good whack toward the floor. The woman screams so badly and everyone in the screen is disgusted. One of the women vomits and people begin to rush out of the screen. My friend and I do the same. Once out in the hallway, neither of us are able to say a word. When things have calmed down a little, several attendants came to check on us and all of us were discussing about what we had just seen. That's when one of the men said out loud, "That's a snuff film. I'm telling you, someone spliced in a snuff film. That's not a fucking regular film and we just saw the real deal." We couldn't fucking believe our ears because two of the younger guys were actually freaking happy about it. They were saying how awesome it was and how their friends would think it's the shit. You know we're coming close to the end of the world when you see reactions like that to something so deplorable. The police were called in and there was an investigation on it. What we saw was an actual snuff film. Someone had spliced in the real stuff to the film that we were actually supposed to watch. We continued watching it because we thought it was part of the film. It was too late by the time we had realized what was happening because we had already seen a real torture scene and we could never get that image out of our minds. South Africa being what it is, one of the most corrupt and vile places on the planet. No one was punished and none of us received compensation for the trauma. Many, myself included, had to seek help from psychologists, but the police erased the whole incident as if we don't even exist. They were probably paid off, and I'm not really surprised because bribery is like a culture here. I've gotten better over the years, but there are still nights when I wake up drenched in sweat from terrible nightmares that I normally can't remember. You can never unsee what you've already seen, but most experiences you forget or at least they become less clear with time. But what I saw on that day, it's been engraved in my mind and I can replay the whole scene in the most visceral and crystal clear imagery. It is truly a nightmare that you can never wake up from. Alright, I'm gonna have to make this quick because I want to publish this by tonight, March 10, 2017, but I do have to thank Sean, April, and Ferdinand for the stories. I loved them all and got a good scare out of them, thank you. Allow me a bit of time to answer a question that's been asked a few times the past couple of months. Some of you were asking if I'd be interested in stories that aren't yours but of your brother, friend, or acquaintance. And the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, a sizable percentage of the stories I do are actually not the experiences of the people who sent them, but rather of their families and friends. I just rewrite them in a way that simplifies the origin of the stories so that I don't have to explain every single time that, for example, this is my brother's stories or this is something that happened to my mom. That's all. So please do send me whatever stories you've got because once I run out of stories, this channel is dead in the water. I've actually hired several people to find and translate stories from Europe and South America, and that's because I'm quickly running out of subscriber submitted stories. You'll recognize the stories by the omission of the names during the intro title. So with that said, thank you all again for the stories. I'll talk to you on the next one. Goodbye.